Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we've all been there, right? You're sitting in a quiet room, maybe you're in the middle of a super important meeting, or just trying to wind down for sleep, and suddenly, hic. It's universal, it's honestly incredibly frustrating, and yeah, it can be a little embarrassing. But what actually is a hiccup? Today we're going to unpack this everyday mystery and figure out exactly why our bodies suddenly decide to turn against us.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the anatomy of a hic, then look at common and surprising triggers. After that, we'll dive into the evolutionary fish theory, which is wild, by the way, then cover when hiccups turn dangerous, and wrap up with science-backed cures and remedies. Let's get to it.
But before we get into the biology, I want you to think about the number 430 million. Seriously, 430 million. That is the estimated number of times a man named Charles Osborne hiccuped. Continuously, over 68 years. He literally started in 1922 and didn't stop until 1990. I mean, that completely shatters our perception of hiccups as just a temporary 5-minute nuisance, doesn't it?
Okay, moving into section 1, anatomy of a hic. What's happening inside? To understand how poor Charles hiccuped for nearly 7 decades, we really need to look at the actual biological mechanics inside our bodies. Let's break down the basic definition here. A hiccup is an involuntary spasm of your diaphragm. Now, that's the big dome-shaped muscle right beneath your lungs that primarily controls your breathing. The spasm is followed immediately by the sudden closure of your vocal cords, which is also known as the glottis. The absolute key word to remember here is involuntary. This is completely independent of your conscious control. You can't just politely decide to stop doing it.
Let's walk through the timeline because it happens incredibly fast. At exactly 0 milliseconds, an irritation of either your phrenic or vagus nerve triggers a reflex arc right in your brainstem. Just one single millisecond later, the diaphragm violently spasms, and that causes a sharp, totally involuntary inhalation of air. Then, at 35 milliseconds, which is literally faster than the blink of an eye, your glottis snaps shut, abruptly stopping that airflow. Boom! That sudden block of air is exactly what creates that signature hic sound. It's this incredibly fast micro-event, perfectly orchestrated by your medulla oblongata.
And, well, as you definitely know from personal experience, you rarely just get one, right? Once triggered, hiccups almost always settle into a remarkably consistent rhythm. This is because there's essentially a pacemaker-like mechanism sitting in your brainstem. It locks into this loop, firing anywhere from 4 to 60 times per minute, just like a metronome ticking away inside your nervous system. Section 2, Common and Surprising Triggers. Tripping the wire. So what exactly is tripping this neurological wire in the first place? It turns out a whole lot of everyday, chaotic actions can accidentally set this thing off. Eating too fast? That causes you to swallow air, which distends your stomach and pushes right up against that diaphragm. Carbonated drinks do the exact same thing as those CO2 bubbles rapidly expand. Alcohol is actually a double whammy here. It causes gastric distension, sure, but it also actively alters your central nervous system, lowering the threshold for that reflex to even fire. Sudden temperature changes from really hot or cold food can stimulate the vagus nerve directly. Even strong emotions, like sudden excitement, heavy laughter, or stress, can alter your breathing pattern and irritate the nerve. Oh, and aerophagia, which is just a fancy word for swallowing air while you're talking or chewing gum, can absolutely be the culprit too.
Which brings us to section 3, the evolutionary fish theory, our aquatic ancestors.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that scientists have long debated why we even have this seemingly useless, highly annoying reflex at all. Dr. Neil Shubin, who is a prominent paleontologist, proposed this leading theory. He says, hiccups mimic the gill ventilation reflex of ancient aquatic ancestors. Water in, glottis shut to stop it reaching the lungs. Yeah, you heard that right. The current scientific thought is that this annoying little spasm is actually a vestigial leftover from fish and amphibians. How crazy is that?
And honestly, the evidence for this ancient wiring is everywhere you look. Just look at this incredibly wide occurrence across different species. Cats, dogs, horses, and even rats all hiccup. Get this? Even tadpoles exhibit a hiccup-like reflex. But arguably the most fascinating piece of evidence, human fetuses hiccup from just 9 weeks gestation, which is way before their lungs are even functional. They are essentially practicing a rhythmic, aquatic-like breathing movement right there in the womb, which beautifully supports this ancient evolutionary theory.
Moving on to section 4, when hiccups turn dangerous, beyond the annoyance.
Now, let's shift gears for a second, because most of us only ever experience acute hiccups, right? Those last under 48 hours. They're super common and totally benign. But Persistent hiccups, the ones lasting 48 hours up to a full month, those actually require medical investigation. They can signal underlying issues like GERD, strokes, or even meningitis. And then there are intractable hiccups, which last over a month. This is a major red flag and always indicates a serious underlying medical condition, like brain tumors, kidney disease, or even tumors that are actively pressing on the vagus nerve. I really want to note soberly here that intractable hiccups aren't just frustrating to deal with, they take a severe physical toll on the human body. The risks include intense sleep deprivation, malnutrition because eating simply becomes impossibly difficult, dehydration, severe exhaustion, and dangerous post-surgical complications. If left untreated for extended periods, they can literally be fatal. Okay, let's get back to the good news in Section 5, Science-Backed Cures and Remedies, Hacking the Reflex. Thankfully, for the vast majority of us, we just need to get rid of the acute ones. Let's do a little myth-busting and finally look at the scientific, physiological truths about hacking this reflex. Here we have the two most famous home remedies, breath holding and paper bag breathing. Now, the crucial point here is that they both work on the exact same physiological principle. They simply raise the carbon dioxide levels in your blood. That elevated CO2 actively suppresses the brainstem's hiccup reflex center, essentially forcing your diaphragm to just relax and reset. And what about all those weird physical gymnastics people always tell you to do? Like, why on earth does bending forward and drinking from the far side of a glass actually work for some people? Well, it's pure biomechanics. Bending forward physically compresses your diaphragm. At the exact same time, swallowing repeatedly stimulates that vagus nerve we talked about. By combining these two physical actions, you are actively interrupting the spasm cycle. Here's another fantastic, super simple first-line remedy that physicians actually recommend: swallowing a teaspoon of dry, granulated sugar. I know, it sounds like an old wives' tale, but the rough texture of the sugar stimulates the vagus nerve directly via the back of your throat. This sudden burst of sensory input essentially overloads and resets the chaotic nerve signals that are driving your diaphragm to spasm in the first place. Now, for those rare, persistent, and intractable cases we discussed a minute ago, doctors have to rely on serious clinical treatments to calm the nervous system down. Chlorpromazine is actually the only FDA-approved drug specifically meant for hiccups, but other medications like baclofen or gabapentin are also commonly used, and in the absolute most extreme cases, specialists might even perform a phrenic nerve block or use targeted nerve stimulation. So while there's no guaranteed magic bullet for your everyday 5-minute hiccup, modern medicine really does have a powerful arsenal for those chronic cases. So we've traveled from a microscopic nerve irritation in the brainstem all the way back to the gill-breathing mechanisms of ancient fish, right down to the sugar cubes sitting in your kitchen. It really summarizes just how incredibly complex and weird the human body is. And it leaves you wondering, what other bizarre ancient reflexes are secretly hiding inside our bodies?